Everybody, here we go. What's up? This is Curtis. Welcome, everyone. I'm here to hang out with all of you Swedenborg Foundation community members, and we're going to answer questions and do all that. And I'm alongside two of the best Swedenborgers in the world, in any world. What's up? Welcome, Cara and Karin.
Thanks, Curtis.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here.
Let's get right to it, because I heard we have 1,000 questions, and we need to get them done. This is, and also because it's a great joy to try to think about these things. So here's Kathy. This is a curiosity with a question in it. Kathy asks, does thy kingdom, truth or wisdom, come, thy will, good or love, be done, and then thine is the kingdom, truth or wisdom, the power, good or love, and the glory, use, come in that order in the prayer, because first we learn truth, then come to love it and use it in our lives? Seems like we learn truth and do it even if we don't love it, and then the Lord gives us the love, right? Just curious. So, can we give her full credit for that?
I love the way you think, Kathy, because definitely Swedenborg says that everything in the Bible, everything in the Word is written in a certain order, in sequence for a reason. And definitely kingdom is a symbol of, it's a symbol of heaven and the church. You know, the Lord's kingdom is heaven and the church, meaning people on earth who are connecting with heaven in their mind. And also particularly, he says that the truth in the church. So the ideas we have in our minds that connect, and definitely might and power are always about goodness and love and stuff. I did find this Apocalypse Explained 48 quote that says this: "Thy kingdom come" is a prayer that truth may be received. "Thy will be done, that it may be received by those who do God's will." And then it goes on, "Thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory" means divine truth from God alone. It is also said power and glory because divine truth has all power and glory. So it does seem to be that, yeah, thy kingdom come is asking that truth will come, and thy will be done, that it may be received by those who do God's will. So yeah, I think you've got something there, Kathy, that does seem to be involved, that we got to get this truth so we have something to work with to begin with, to just start engaging with these thoughts. And like you said, we don't start out with a great love of truth. You know, we start out with a more lower ego will, and we have to have some interest, some goodness, some love to even want to learn in the first place. But as we get these truths and work on applying them, you're absolutely right that the Lord then builds love in our heart for those concepts and doing them. So that was my response to your suggestion. I like it.
I like it too, man. I think, you asked if it was right, and even if it's not right, I think it's good. I mean, it's a lovely way to think of it. If that's where your mind grows with those words, I think it's a beautiful gift from the Lord that's what you're seeing. I looked on New Christian Bible Study, and just one of, if you hover over one of those blue words, something came up that said that the kingdom symbolizes the church, that the might and power are the divine celestial, and glory is the divine spiritual. So that's another slightly different kind of threesome that you could view it as. But I loved your thought of glory equaling usefulness, perhaps symbolizing usefulness, because I just never thought about it that way. And that did something for me, to just think of the shining for the world as the useful thing that's going out to touch us all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what we find ourselves in the middle of is, so Swedenborg covered a certain amount of the biblical text, and he said, this is what this is, and that's what that is. But he didn't cover it all. And he's saying, I didn't devise this. This is already in the text. It's already there. I'm just showing you where it is in some places. So I think what we're trying to do here is say, look, you can see it there, because as soon as she's pointed that out, it seemed like, wow, that's a really blatant, obvious example of the love and the wisdom use thing, especially thy kingdom, which, yeah, definitely is true. And then thy will. The second one is the will. The will and understanding that's so I would just say, when I first saw it, I thought, wow, yeah, that proves correspondences, because it's exactly sounds like love, wisdom, and use. So, and even I'm not even phased by if Swedenborg says, well, this in this part, this means this. There's so much in each of those. I'm sure that there's the love. So you guys already made the points. All I'm trying to say is, look, it's not just like Swedenborg showed you, here's what's going on, but he went like Genesis, Exodus, and then he stopped. But the implication is it's in all of it. It's in all of it. So I just think that's cool. Like, oh yeah, the kingdom and their will, kingdom, the power, and the glory, and we know it's love, wisdom. There's love, wisdom, and use. Probably not a coincidence. Okay, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And also Swedenborg says that every verse, every line has more meaning than we could ever imagine. So even when he does give us this means this means that, that's just one little piece of all the infinite, deeper and deeper meaning. And so I think, that he's just giving us a start, and we're invited to see it for ourselves, to see what comes to our minds, what the Lord brings to our minds when we're reading something.
What's that? Flaming sword? The flaming sword, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's in the Garden of Eden, there's like a guard that has a flaming sword I'm doing this because it spins around. And doesn't he say the inner meaning of that is that passages from the word have many good meanings, provided that they are all good, like lead in the direction of truth. Am I saying something? Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do remember
Sounds great.
that.
I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, now I got it. At some point we'll check this out. That's not it. Okay, great question and curiosity, Kathy. Let's go to Susie Laidlaw, which I think there's a good link here, because we're just talking about the nature of Swedenborg and what he is unpacking, and yet there's something here. So this is a good one. I have trouble knowing for sure what to call Swedenborg when I explain who he was to people. I know he said he was a servant of the Lord, but that doesn't really explain who he was to other people. Others have called him a prophet, but that doesn't really seem to fit either. I personally have settled on revelator. You think that's a good description, or does it just open more doors that perhaps is necessary at a first introduction? So this, like, off the left eye has been an attempt at a first introduction of Swedenborg to the world. Isn't that what we've been doing for all these years?
Mm-hmm.
And man, I you know how humility is so important, as Swedenborg is always saying, humility is so important. So I think in Providence, God had it so that Swedenborg has this very strange name, Emmanuel Swedenborg. It doesn't sound cool. I was at the IANS convention giving a talk, and a couple times someone's like, "What's your talk about?" And I'm like, "Emmanuel Swedenborg." They're like, "What did you just say?" But yeah, what is he? I want to say, I'll open the floor, but others have called him a prophet, but that doesn't really seem to fit either. And I think so. Well, because according to Swedenborg, prophets do something in particular. Like, prophets portray the state of the church. All these prophets in the Bible, when they have to do all these weird things that are recorded in the Bible, like lie on their side for a year and shave off their beard and cook over a dung fire. That's to bring down in correspondences what has happened in the church. And yeah, they say some things too, but those are also in correspondences. And then Jesus Christ, Swedenborg says, was sort of the ultimate prophet, in that his crucifixion was a picture of the state of the church and how people had destroyed the word. Swedenborg didn't really ever do anything like that, or didn't allude to the idea that anything in his life had a representative quality, but he sure did give you a lot of really high-end super truth. So what is he? Okay, that's the question. What do you think?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Curtis. According to what Swedenborg learned, a prophet is a very different thing, just what you just described. And that does not seem to be what Swedenborg is. And I love that Susie brings up that just the term servant of the Lord doesn't seem to quite narrow it down enough, because there's so many ways to serve the Lord, endless ways to be a servant of the Lord. I like revelator, because revelator means someone who reveals something. And in this case, Swedenborg says he received this revelation and he wrote it down so that the rest of us could get in touch with us. So I like revelator myself. I think that's a good one. Like John on the Isle of Patmos was a revelator. He saw things, he wrote them down.
Oh man, I didn't think about that. Is John because John wasn't a prophet. He didn't have anything like the stuff he was seeing. He didn't understand a lot of it, but he wasn't portraying anything.
Mm-hmm.
And what about like Paul, who had some spiritual experience where he said he was caught up to the third heaven and heard ineffable things, but he wasn't a prophet. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I kind of like, I mean, one, I hear what you're saying about how Swedenborg defines what a prophet's role is. But for people who don't know about that, who just think of the prophets in the Bible, I mean, I kind of like this similarity. The point being, it's coming from on high, and they're a mouthpiece for it. So I like that reference to the idea of prophet for Swedenborg. He's not sitting down and writing it down out of his own head, which I think, people have, that's a hurdle for people to get. I mean, I think a lot of people just think Swedenborg wrote this, Swedenborg said this, Swedenborg. So that's why one reason I like the idea of prophet, even though it's not Swedenborg's definition of a prophet. And also the thought of just like, well, he had a lot, like 30 years worth of near-death experiences. I've said that before, to just get people in the realm of what are we talking about here? For me, I don't like to use personally just one label because it's too limiting. I just always want to start out with that he was a scientist, blah, 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 blah. And then he had a calling and his whole world shifted around to spiritual. And then I might use revelation or something. I don't know. It's so hard. I think it's just so important to whoever you are to be comfortable with the words you're saying so that you don't start like with the person,
It's funny. I think, unfortunately, you're right about the prophet thing. And that brings us back to square one. But the thing I will add on to what you're saying is that it also, in a weird way, takes some of the weirdness out of it. Because if you really believe this was a divine dispensation that came down through Swedenborg, and people be like, what? You can't like this guy. But if you say, well, that happened a lot of other times. It happened with Moses, and it happened with Isaiah, and it happened with Ezekiel, and it happened with these are all these different times with when God dipped in and always does it through human beings, always does it through some person, and puts this stuff in there. You can say, oh yeah, Swedenborg was kind of in that vein, even if technically he wasn't. So I get what you're saying there. I'll say this too. My day job is to try to do what Susie's talking about, and I don't really know how to do it still. I was at the same thing. I was just doing this in real life at this conference last weekend, where a couple of times I was trying to explain who Swedenborg is to people. These are people at the near-death experience conference, but you never know. You never have a standard. Oh, it's easy. I would say, well, I think Swedenborg was kind of like the original near-death experience, because he was sort of he's what kicked the whole thing off, and he's influenced so many. But it's tough. It's tough to know. I think there's not really a one size fits all. There's not an easy way to do it, because too, it's not just that he had these near-death experiences. He had these experiences, or spiritually transformative experiences, but he was on a mission. Like I've read a lot of other NDEs and stuff, and I don't know if I've ever encountered somebody who said, God told me that I was going to be exploring this other world because I'm supposed to bring this like new revelation to the human race. Like I'm not just here because I was in a car accident. Like I'm here for this. It's just and also it's Mozart. Like the stuff he brought back there's a lot of spiritual experiences that are great. I really feel like even today, hundreds of years later, when spiritual experiences are popularized and everything, he's bringing so much that nobody else is bringing. That I feel like just like today, there's a ton of composers, but Mozart is still like, wow, something else happened, or whatever, Bach or Beethoven. I don't know, man. I don't know. So that's a great question, Susie.
Yeah. I like the idea. I like the word revelator. It works for me. I wonder if there's any resonance in most people's minds for that word.
Mhm.
You know
what's Joseph Smith? Joseph Smith of Mormonism.
Yeah.
Is he? What do people call him? Do they call him a prophet?
I don't know.
Don't know.
Yeah, I heard Joseph Smith read Swedenborg. Okay, here we go. This is from Nancy.
Thanks, Susie.
Thank you, Susie.
Thank you, Susie. You win. You win this round, Susie. This is from Nancy, who asks, in the modern era, why do the Ten Commandments now appear to not have the incredible power as described in numerous stories within the Old Testament? So what incredible power are we talking about here? You mean like the actual stone tablets?
That I was assuming, so maybe Nancy can tell us later if this was a wrong assumption, but I'm assuming she means, yeah, that like in the stories, the tablets actually had power, and there's all this explosions on Mount Sinai, and sometimes if someone touches the ark where the tablets are, boom, they're thrown back, and that kind of power. So that's what I was assuming.
I agree.
And my thoughts about that are, so there were these drastic sort of spiritual into the physical powers back then, but that didn't mean that everybody obeyed them. I mean, there was still plenty of killing and adultery and stealing and everything. So the important power is the power to change the heart, right? And Swedenborg does talk about how these drastic external miracles were allowed back then because there wasn't enough, people weren't quite able or willing yet to really take it in. And that was kind of keeping people on the straight and narrow, so to speak, when, start to doubt or go astray. Boom, there's this big miracle. And they say, oh, okay, yep, you're our God and everything. But then they'd stray again and everything. So it doesn't, he talks about how external miracles don't change people's hearts. It just doesn't happen. And when Jesus came, he was introducing this whole new era where, and I was even just reading something Swedenborg was writing about when there was a last judgment that happened in the spiritual world at the time of Jesus being on earth. And at that time, there was a new ability of God to actually enter people's minds in a deeper way, to a deeper place. And so Jesus came and everything is changing. It's not about, he did his external miracles, but that was just to represent the things he can do in our heart and mind. And his teachings were telling us more about why and, how to live a good life and to not do harm to the neighbor, how to love the neighbor and love God. And so the power of the Ten Commandments has to be within. And it is within, like the Ten Commandments have power when we willingly choose to follow them. And that's the real power, that is the lasting power. So external, like explosions around where the words are written would not do what it does when we consider them ourselves and accept those as divine divine teachings to live by and then live by them. That's the real power. And it has to be chosen freely. So if there were explosions all over the place, we wouldn't be choosing it freely. There was a time where that was needed temporarily, but it's more important that they not have these amazing miracles around them, because we need to choose freely because they make sense.
Yeah. The whole state of the human race has changed. And it used to be it wasn't just that. If you read the Bible, it wasn't just the 10 Commandments that were doing miraculous stuff. There was pillars of cloud and fire, and there was angels there was miracles going on everywhere. Jesus did a ton of miracles, but that's not the prescription anymore. That's not what we need. Yeah. I think that's great. I don't have anything else to add, Cara.
No.
Okay. Stuart in the chat just did say that from Wikipedia, Mormons generally regard Smith as a prophet comparable to Moses and Elijah. So I don't mind prophet. I do like the energy of prophet, because I definitely think, oh yeah, this is of high importance. I would say if you get into like the technicalities of it, he's not really, and that's not what a prophet does, but yeah, I mean, basically, it's just different. It's so different that it's not like Swedenborg is something like another. Like I sometimes think with the Church of Latter-day Saints, which I don't know anything about, that when I've read of the Book of Mormon, it's kind of like the Bible Part 2. It's written in a similar style. It describes events that are kind of like there, whereas Swedenborg is nothing like the Bible, and it's very much just like, oh, this is just a book written by a person who's telling you why they're writing this book and trying to explain something to you. They're trying to teach you in language you can understand what's going on here. It's a different character, but yet it is absolutely the thing by which I have any understanding of the Bible, and that it's what makes me care about the Bible. It's what makes me care about religion. So I don't know, man. Okay. Anyway.
It is a lot about associations with the words. Like the niggle I have with the word prophet is the like prophesying, like just prophesying and saying cryptic things and things. Where you're saying Swedenborg was very, I like Revelator, even though I know I agree with what you're saying. Like prophet does indicate somebody in communication with God, so the word revelator would have to mean that to you too. He is receiving things and revealing them to us in a way that we could grasp,
and he's also he's not a guru. He's not mysterious at all. He has no, like, I just mean him by like the voice that comes through in the books and what I know about his life. He doesn't have any aura of mystery. He doesn't say things that like, someday, Grasshopper, you will understand what I'm saying. He's like, it's confusing, and he knows it's confusing, and he says, I'm sorry, I'm trying to explain. What he is just like a regular person who has got this like extraordinary job to do. I mean, that,
Yeah.
That's what it feels like getting into the books. It's not at all like like the first page of the first book. He's like, I understand people are going to think that I'm doing this, that I'm lying and I'm crazy. I understand that. And yet I have to do this. Now let's get down to work. And here, it's just a different vibe. It's a different vibe.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I want to add too that I actually don't, when somebody asks me who's Swedenborg, I don't say he's a revelator, even though I like that. I do, like Cara was saying, like I give a little paragraph, like, well, he was the 18th century scientist, and then in his mid-50s, he had a spiritual experience. He had a vision, after repentance and Bible study and
prayer,
self-examination and prayer, he had this spiritual experience and vision of Christ who called him to reveal things. So I do tend to give a little paragraph rather than
visions of Christ. Not that we're, but it's a red flag whenever somebody has a vision of Jesus. Whenever I just hear it, I'm like, uh-oh. But yet it's so funny. It depends on who you're talking to, because
it does.
we have most of the time, as soon as somebody thinks Jesus is talking to them, it's over. They're doing some cult or there's something like that's when we lost it. As soon as Jesus shows up. However, I think there's something so important about the fact that Swedenborg is saying, I'm not just doing this for fun. I'm not doing this on my own initiative. My boss came and told me do this, and he's the one who's trying to make this happen. That's such a key part of it. So sometimes I feel like there's layers to it, where first I'll just say something like, oh, Swedenborg is the best spiritual material I've ever come across by a wide margin. And you say that first. He wouldn't want to say that. He'd want to say, I'm a servant of the Lord Jesus Christ. But what you first say is this is really good spiritual material. And then once you get him a little bit, you say, oh, and they're like more of a believer or something. You say that this isn't from a person. The working theory is this is where you most clearly hear the voice of God, you know?
And the moral of the story is depends on who you're talking to, right? Because when a Christian asks me, I'll insert the, prayer and vision of Christ. But you're right. If somebody else asks, you start differently.
What would you say to your cat? It's like
just crawled across my desk and
as a revelator. I know how cats are. Okay, let's go to the next one. I said we'd get through them all, and we're almost there. But okay, but I do feel like the intro to Swedenborg conversation is the conversation of all conversations.
Yeah,
it's like this is a problem. We haven't solved this thing yet. Georgie asks, can you give some insight or comment on Elizabeth April insights, especially Age of Enlightenment, Aquarian Age, and GFL?
I just I hadn't heard of Elizabeth April. I just looked up and saw that she's a clairvoyant, an intuitive psychic, and an author who also makes videos. And I don't know her philosophies, so can't comment on them, but I can share, Swedenborg does talk about ages. He calls them churches. And he says we're in the era moving out of, one age, spiritual era into the next one, which he calls the new church, a new way of thinking and being as human beings. But he doesn't, within every era, there are lots of sub eras, which you get the sense of that when describing like the inner meaning of a genealogy in the Bible, like in the Old Testament was saying, so-and-so beget so-and-so and so-and-so beget so-and-so. That's representing that every bigger era, spiritual era, has all these phases to it. One gives birth to the other. So there definitely are, sub-ages within ages, but he is not commenting specifically on them, just generally about this new church era, which will be, moving into reconnecting with awareness of the spiritual world, the deeper meanings in scripture, the deeper ways of how to love the neighbor, more seeing the common ground. So things like that.
Wait a second. You're saying he doesn't tell you what's going to happen in the future? What kind of prophet is that? Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Like, if any, anybody else, I tend to measure anybody else against Swedenborg, and I feel like how you measure against Swedenborg is what's the prevailing message that they have. Is what's the point of life? And if the point of life is to be useful and regenerate and shun what is evil and do what is good, then that's the easiest way to know if they line up with Swedenborg. Because even Swedenborg, like the point of what he's saying isn't to have spiritual experiences or know the future or anything like that. It's just like so mundane. It's disappointingly mundane in a good way. Okay. So,
I did look at, can I just say something? I looked for a minute too. I had never heard of Elizabeth April, and I looked at her website for a minute. And I see that she's very into past life regressions and aliens and things like that, and a reincarnation. So those are just different than Swedenborg. And I don't know what GFL means even. Do you, Cara?
I just looked it up. I thought it's like Galactic Federation. It's so Swedenborg does talk about aliens some, but not high tech aliens.
Not in that way. Yes.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth April says she was abducted, and that was what by aliens, and that's what turned her into a spiritual channeler kind of girl. Anyway, so yeah, Swedenborg talks about aliens, but more about their spiritual makeup, not that they're having, not that they're coming to Earth to visit.
Yes,
spirits are like.
Man, I was just watching YouTube. I was watching YouTube the other day. I just watched this long interview of somebody who had like, I don't know. She was saying it was on like a Christian channel, and it was a big Christian channel. I was like, okay, what are they doing? How do they do their shows and stuff? And this lady was saying that she, if you got deeply into what she called the occult and was doing all this stuff that was not good, and then she changed her life, and now she's like a Christian person. But in there, she was talking about how she was visited by these beings who she said she thought were aliens for a long time, but it turns out they were just like evil spirits or something. So I don't know. So yeah, that it's a whole big world. Who knows? Yeah, right. Like Swedenborg does not acknowledge the existence of past lives and reincarnation. He has an alternate explanation for why people experience the memories of what seem to be previous lives. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know in April enough to say.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Let's go to another one. Okay, this is a long question, so stay with me. And then we'll answer it. Eileen asks, my question is regarding correspondences. Let's go. What might be going on in heaven that corresponds to the hell on earth we are experiencing these days? With the accessibility worldwide of the internet, virtually every human being is experiencing the stress of, for example, rabid materialism, widespread moral corruption, artificial intelligence programmed by biased political and social operatives to control the narratives and mold future thought, worldwide surveillance, COVID pandemic and worldwide lockdowns, war in Ukraine and genocide in Gaza. In case any of you at home forgot everything that's going on that's stressful. And internal wars in countries all around the globe, worldwide financial instability, IMF, forced digital currency, forced vaccinations, sterility, etc. Rudolf Steiner is an 8th Sphere lecture, tells of the evil specter that is surrounding the earth. So all this stuff is going on. Is there something in heaven that corresponds? Like what's going on in the spiritual world that would make all this happen? I was having a conversation this morning at breakfast with a guy who's into Swedenborg, who I had never met before, but we were chatting it up. And he was saying that like, if you think about the earth, just the people on earth as like a grand human, it's sort of like the nervous system was just built, meaning the internet. And now with AI, it's like this, that's like the nervous system of the human race. It's like how everything connects to everything else instantly. And so maybe it's just this like, wow, that's intense. In a new level, we're becoming like a human body because we're as connected as like our actual human body used to be. That like, oh yeah, this people that are living across the ocean, I don't know what they're doing. Maybe I'll find out in 10 months when the next ship arrives. But now it's like we're all connected instantly, which is how it is in the body. If I think something, my hand can do it right away. So that's one thought I had. Do either of you have some thoughts about that whole thing?
Did you say something, Cara?
I just said I'm stumped.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm always wanting very much, because I don't experience hell on earth. I mean, I like to stay really in touch with what's going on in the world, but what I see is there's also a ton of heaven on earth, and if I guess it's traditionally, bad news travels faster or, gets more attention and things, but there's so much good news too. And I just really want people to remember to notice that, because, fear, well, this was really a striking quote from Divine Providence that I came across, Divine Providence 139. Love opens the inner reaches of the mind, but fear closes them. And when they are closed, we do very little actual thinking, being conscious then only of what is impinging on our feelings or our senses. And if we're getting, afraid because the world is so bad, I think it's harder maybe to notice the good. And that there's a very frequent instruction in the Bible, don't be afraid, and I feel like that's not just like, oh, stop feeling that thing, but it's like it's encouraging us, if you can try to not just spiral into fear, things will be better, because you'll be able to think more clearly and notice big picture movements and things. We're way more aware of bad things going on in the world now, like you said, Curtis, but there's actually a lot less war and a lot less atrocities than there used to be. I was just recently in Sweden and just reviewing, going to a museum and seeing the history through the Middle Ages and everything. And the Middle Ages, there was so much more horrors going on, so much more disregard for human life. People were, we were touring this castle and people were tossed in the dungeon like pieces of garbage into sewage and not fed and chained up. And that was just the way it was, it was just like, that's just how it is. While the wealthy were up in the higher levels of the castle, eating excessively, getting tons of riches, conquering the next city and things like that. So I think, to me, it's important to notice, just like in your own development, to notice how far you've come, not only the problems you still are wrestling with, but how far the Lord has brought you. I feel like I want to remind everybody to look at what the Lord has done since, that slavery is not acceptable anymore. It's not totally eradicated around the world, but it's not accepted like it used to be, or like in the Roman Empire, just to throw people in an arena for entertainment. These things are not socially acceptable anymore. So there's still a ways to go. And about that dark, she mentioned the dark, something around
evil specter around the earth.
Swedenborg did describe seeing like this cloud of distortion around Earth, of evil spirits distorting what was coming down through heaven. And that wouldn't be what's going on in heaven that this corresponds to on Earth, but what's going on in the spiritual world. There's a lot in this world that corresponds to something in the spiritual world, the lower parts, not the heavenly parts. But I have to believe it's getting better, that since the 1700s, that was the time of the Enlightenment. I asked my castle guide, who was, because she said this is how horrible things were in the 1500s, 1600s with, but then things weren't so horrible for prisoners starting in the 1700s, and, the less bad treatment of people. And I said, what do you think made the change? And she said, well, I guess because the Enlightenment came along. But what causes the Enlightenment? And people starting to think, wait, maybe slavery is not a good idea, and maybe just torture that's new light coming through from the spiritual world, getting through that cloud in a better way. So I think if we can not go to fear, but look to the good, and then we can think more clearly to how to address the problems that still are here and still need addressing. So yeah, it's just who I am, is I always want to don't forget to look for the good. Don't just focus on the bad, and trust that the Lord is working on things. We don't need to be afraid. We just need to be awake and alert and like, okay, what's the next thing to work on and support in getting that healed and getting that stopped or whatever.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. More good than bad. It's the same thing about how you think about your own life. You just like, oh, this thing is broken in the basement. I messed up. I said that thing wrong. My life is not good. Whereas there's so much good stuff going around. But like you can get focused. It's the same sort of thing. You can get focused on the world. But I sometimes think about how, like, you'll hear a lot of bad stuff going on in the world. But like, if I go out and just go out the door and just walk for miles, everything I come across, all the interactions between people are going to be positive and good. There's just a few outlying things, but the norm is good. The norm is goodness.
I find the same thing. Just go walk in my day. And there's places in the world where things are rougher, but that's the things we need to keep working on and be alert to, and seeing what can we do to collectively.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's enough. Go ahead.
Okay. Just about the evil specter around the earth. I mean, that makes me think, well, Karin, you're just reminding us of the balance between evil and good, and that's what Swedenborg talks about, the importance of the human race being in a spiritual equilibrium. So there has to be there's evil influence and there's good influence, and the two of those forces are essential so that we have a true freedom to choose what we want to give our allegiance and our love to. So we can't, as I understand it, we can't just snap our fingers and have all the evil go away. It's part of what helps us develop as human beings into who we're going to be for eternity.
Right. And the very internet that brings us the news of all these things is what's allowed us to put Swedenborg out there. So it's allowed Swedenborg to grow. So take the good with it. But it's good question, good thoughts, Eileen.
It is a good, and I just want to add on to Kara's. I've definitely read in Swedenborg that the Lord makes sure that no matter how big evil gets, that the balance is maintained. Like the Lord will intervene to make sure we don't lose goodness. I mean, that's what the last judgments have been about. And when evil is getting too dark, last judgment, so that more goodness can get in. So, and we can all help.
Unless Swedenborg was drastically wrong, things were much worse in the year 0 and much worse in the year 1700 than they are now.
Yes.
Or 1757. Okay. Let's go. We got more questions. We got to go. Okay. This is question number 6 from Earl, who asks, why are there times you cannot get enough of spiritual learning, and other times desire for learning and growth drops to a minimum that can last for weeks? It's so true. There's times when I'm just like, I'm reading and thinking and I'm doing that, and times when it's just not really in mind. And I mean, my first response would be the spirit, and the things of the spirit are like the things of the body. So there's times when I'm very hungry, and there's times when I'm not, because it's just part of these processes. And you couldn't eat all the time. You got to digest sometimes, and you got to not. It's not mealtime sometimes. Same thing. It's just part of the natural cycles of growth and development. There's times when you're immersed in spiritual learning. There's times when you're immersed in just practical acting, or you're giving yourself a break from getting too spiritual. Swedenborg talks a few times about warning against getting too wrapped up in spiritual matters. It can be frustrating, though, because there's times when I feel like I'm really on with this whole Swedenborg stuff. Like I'm really, everything's humming, and I know how to navigate all the problems of life, and I have a little answer to everything in my head, and it's really working, and why shouldn't it? This is like, I'm a Swedenborg guy. Why don't I do that? And there's other times when I'm like, I'm barely thinking about it. So it goes, but I've sort of learned to say, like, all right, don't force anything. If you're not feeling it, you can't force it. Like, just like if you're not hungry, you can't eat. So you'll come back around. You'll be hungry again.
That's so great. Yeah. I mean, if you just look at anything in the world, it's all in cycles, seasons and cycles, that nothing stays static.
And it's literally as complex as that. When Swedenborg says that the goodness is the food for the spirit and truth is water for the spirit, he's saying that literally is happening on a spiritual level. That there are little structures in your spirit that are as complicated or more complicated than the physical structures in your body, and that the truth that enters you is actually, it's a substance of some kind, and it needs time to like percolate through and become part of you. Same thing with the good that stuff there's parallel or correspondent processes happening in your spirit. So I'm not just saying that as like a metaphor. The same thing is happening in your spirit. So there has to be these periods of hunger and then satiation.
Well said. Nothing to add. I agree.
Okay, Mary Wolf. This is question number 7. Mary Wolf asks, I can never express enough of my gratitude for the Swedenborg team. Thanks, Mary. Thank you all. Regret and guilt appear to go hand in hand in our human lives. Grief seems to be intertwined as well. Are these evil spirits within creating emotional havoc? Does Emanuel Swedenborg write about these at times crippling emotions we have today? And are any of these feelings experienced in the afterlife? Thank you.
I think, what we go through in this life, when we're experiencing emotions like that, and they often do go along when somebody's died, we kind of wrestle with regrets and guilt. And I think that in this life, we're usually experiencing a mixture of good regrets and harmful guilt because, regret, a healthy regret, not necessarily about, a healthy regret is you'll do it differently next time. Clarity about, no, that's not how I want to be or do things anymore. So I see clearly I want to be differently. Guilt, if it's crippling, then that's from hell. Boy, hell loves to pile on the guilt, make you not able to forgive yourself, not able to let it go, think, have things going crazy in your mind of you should have this and should have that. That's hell. So if it's not productive, meaning if it just doesn't give you something like, okay, now I'm going to try to be this way instead of that way, that involves heaven, and that's part of a healthy purging process. But hell is all about guilt. So when it's crippling and it just plagues you over and over again, that's hell. As far as in the afterlife, I think those emotions only when it's needed and useful for moving forward. Like in the world of spirits, people can go through feelings, but only if that's going to help you let go of something. And it's not something that is supposed to continue, except as in heaven, there are just way more mild forms of just realizing things that need to change, but just intense crippling guilt, that's not something that doesn't continue. Because if you didn't feel bad about anything you've done and you want to live in hell because you love to treat people badly, you don't feel guilty about it. And if you're heading heavenward, you're going to be shown, to let go of unnecessary guilt and just to act on healthy ways of, I want to change. So I don't think guilt is something that happens continually in the afterlife. Those are my thoughts.
Regret and guilt. If they're causing paralysis, that does purely seem like hell. But I love what Karin said about anything that motivates a change, a regret that motivates a change, or some repentance, or I'm going to not do that again and do this instead. That's good. But but if it hangs around and just plagues you and paralyzes you, not good. Doesn't Swedenborg say, what is it? You guys will know. Something about spirits in the stomach, anxiety spirits are in the stomach or something like that. Um,
Yeah, in
Yeah.
heaven and hell.
something
Guilt spirits.
but-
Yep.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
just-
that
Go ahead.
definitely a really salient part of Swedenborg's description of the influence of the spiritual world on us is the emotional influence. He talks all the time about the spiritual world influencing how he feels. And the example you mentioned was he said in heaven and hell. Guess what? He didn't say guess what, but basically in that tone, I've learned where we get the disquiet of mind and something that we call depression. There are spirits, and he talks about these certain kind of spirits who get around you and talk about things that you can't hear them talking because they're talking in the spiritual world, but they talk about things that would disturb you. And from that, you get this feeling of being disturbed. And things like that are happening to him all the time, or he understands that that's what's going on. And when he talks about spiritual trials or crises of the spirit or temptations, it's sometimes translated, he's saying all you feel is this inner torment. You don't realize this is kind of caused by the evil spirits around you getting riled up when heaven comes close. And so there's so much of that. And I think that's fascinating. Well, as you guys were talking, I wanted to make the bold claim, and I think I'm going to make it anyway, that most of the feelings that you feel on any given day aren't real. I mean, there's like plenty that are, but a lot of them don't. Maybe like 70% of them, like are just this stuff, like the ruminating and the guilt, and I'm gonna get revved up about this thing. That stuff is not like, or for me anyway, it's like, no, that doesn't need to be there. It's not. That doesn't not have to be the headline. We were just talking about this with focusing on everything that's going on in the world and the distress that causes you. That's not real, because it's just like, it doesn't have to be what you're thinking about or what you're feeling right then. It seems to me like a lot of the distress or discontent or anything you get about life doesn't really need to be there. It's not the true feelings. There's times when you really, as you're saying, you have an interaction with somebody and maybe you said something wrong and you do need to learn from that. But so much of it, how much is it like, I've had people tell me like, I just want to say, Curtis, I'm so sorry about that thing that I did that time. And I was like, and they're like, it's been eating me up for all this time. And I'm like, what? I don't even remember that thing that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I just had it, when I was giving my talk last weekend, right when it was done, somebody came up and said, I'm so sorry. I got a call during the end of it, so I had to leave. And like, she felt like it had disrupted the talk or something. And she had come back and to her, it was this big deal. And I was just like, man, I did not think about that for half a split second, So those thoughts and feelings in her head, like, that's not real. It's not real. It's just, so I would think that's just got to be from hell. It's not like the angels are making you feel like that. And I think there's so much of that. And so much of that is going on inside each of us all the time that it just seems like there's some true good, there's some real feelings in there, but a lot of it is just, I was just reading, I watched something on, I forget, I was seeing somebody give some presentation or something, and they said that they struggled with limerence. And I was like, what's limerence? And so I looked it up, and it's like, it's sort of like a romantic obsession, but it's this clinical psychological term for people who they get really fixated on someone, and specifically on wondering whether or not that person feels attracted to them back or not. And it becomes this thing that is like totally all consuming for this person, and it destroys their happiness. It's just all fake. Like, it's just all fake. Like, they don't even really know the person at all. Stuff like that, like the over amplification of feelings just happens so frequently in the human race. And I just feel like most of it ain't real. It's just us being caught up in these eddies, and there's real feelings under there, but they're most of the time obscured by, as you're saying, this like, oh, I'm guilty and all that about this stuff you don't need to be, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something that's not useful. It's not helping you or anybody. It's, it's only doing
there's no shortage of feelings. Like a Swedenborg experience going into the afterlife, his explanation of consciousness is like, there's like the truth, and there's heaven, and there's God, and the feelings that they give you. And then there's the falsity and evil and hell, and there's the feelings that it gives you. And all the, as you said, all unrest is from evil and falsity. So all that stuff is there, and spirits of all kinds and communities would get around him and make him feel a certain way and disrupt what he's trying to do. But what he was, where we're trying to get to is where we move away from all that and just feel the feelings the angels are given, which is, being in the stream of providence is like the same thing is happening around you. Same events are happening, but you don't get discouraged when things go your way because you trust in what God is doing. That's the point, is to like, feelings aren't always telling you something. A lot of times they're just making it like they're misleading you. They're leading you astray. That's why you need truths. Like, oh no, wait, God is taking care of this. You didn't like, it didn't just occur into your mind. You didn't occur in your thought. It just know that you got told that. Really? It didn't seem like God is taking it. That's really what's going on. That's been my experience so consistently in life, is like Swedenborg's material comes and scoops you out of that mess and puts you in this clear, bright, warm space.
Reminds you of the big picture. Yep.
That must be
reality.
The truth. Puts you in the reality. It puts you in the truth, and the truth. So much of what we scuttle around in all day is not really the truth. That's what I think. That's what I think, anyway.
Yeah. Let's see if we can fit in. Oh, go ahead.
You can do the next 3 questions in 20 seconds each.
Okay, here we go. Sean Smith.
4 minutes, don't we?
What's that? 3 minutes.
Okay, 1 minute each. Yeah.
Okay. What does Swedenborg say about Nephilim, and how does that relate to today's society? Cara.
I just, one of the main numbers is from Secrets of Heaven 581 that talks about that. And in brief, he says that the Nephilim symbolize people who place no value on anything holy or true. And I think just contemplating that sentence when we think about this world is interesting. Holy or true. Who does anybody care about what is holy or true?
Oh, and that's great, Cara. And I'm going to continue that number. I found that same number because Swedenborg talks about the Nephilim as the spirits of people from long ago that are in hell at the moment. They were very persuasive, and they were right. They were all against what is holy and true. And then kind of bringing it into the presence. No value on anything holy or true because of delusions about their own importance and superiority. People's delusions about themselves and their fantasies grow as they amass more and more contributing arguments until finally those delusions become permanent. And when they drag religious teachings in, they develop the most rigid point of view, which causes them to completely discount the value of anything holy or true, making themselves into Nephilim. So it's a combination of an attitude that's very narcissistic, very full of themselves, and scoffing at things that are holy at the same time. So that's an attitude we can all watch out for.
Question number 9. Cliff asks, from your research, is it more of a mental connection that spouses have when one crosses over and the other is left behind? I like to think that my wife isn't being held back by me.
Oh, she's not being held back, Cliff. You are so sweet how much you love her. And, even on Earth, spouses are in sync in some ways and then doing their own thing in other ways. And she can continue to evolve while still being connected to your thoughts and feelings. So you are not holding her back. She can be connected with you and keep doing her thing. And you are changing too. You don't realize it, but your spirit is evolving too. So you don't have to worry 1 second about, you can be connected with her and not be holding her back.
Yeah, you got heaven, and God is like, they're making sure there's no situation like that where it's like, oh, this whole thing, we have it so people stay connected when they're across the veil, but we forgot that they'd hold each other back. Like, the system works well. All we got to do is try to be good and true and useful in our lives. So good on you, Cliff, and I'm sure it'll be a joyful reunion coming right up.
Yes,
Uh,
yes.
Okay, here we
Well-
go. We got plenty of time. John Childs asks,
Oh,
Swedenborg suggests cross-referencing words used in one Bible passage to understand others. Any thoughts on that?
My
that
thoughts
is what
listening to any Jonathan Rose Bible study will give you a great adventure in that, where he just goes from the beginning to the end of the Bible, looking at one word often, or a phrase. And it's so fascinating to see that over all this huge span of time and different authors and different inspirations, these words mean something. You know, you can just see that inner correspondence shining through.
Yes, and that's definitely what was part of Swedenborg's process as he was getting things revealed to him as he's studying the Bible. He is noticing the ways the words are being used in all different points of the Bible and the context, and that it's so consistent. And so, yeah, we get that little jump start from Swedenborg realizing this. Absolutely, you can do that yourself. You know, just start noticing, oh, there's that word again, or that phrase, but yeah, Spirit and Life Bible Study. Jonathan will take you through that. Look up that channel on YouTube.
This is just what we were talking about with the first question, which was she was saying, hey, don't you guys notice how Swedenborg talks about certain words? And now here in the Lord's Prayer, this is how they're being used. And this
Yeah,
gets into too, when
exactly.
you say, what was Swedenborg? Is he some kind of prophet or something? You'd say, well, the theory is that he's just pointing out something that's there, that's already there. So he's saying this stuff about the Bible, but it's there. It's already there. So it should be, once you're equipped enough, you can start to see at least indications of it, which I think that's what Jonathan is doing in his Bible study, is saying, okay, Swedenborg gave us this start. Can it become apparent now? Because I really think if you look at the way Swedenborg wrote Secrets of Heaven, it seems like he's trying to get you to be able to speak the language so that you can go and look at other parts of the Bible. I mean, the way that he writes it, he'll say, this says this, here's why this says this, here's your cross references, so you can see how it's used in other parts of the Bible. He does it, but also it seems like he's trying to equip you to be able to see, you can see this for yourself. Go check it out. Okay, everybody, we got pretty close on the question number. Thanks everyone for writing in.
That was the last one, actually.
Was it?
Wrong. There were 10.
Let's go. Look at how great we are.
Great
No,
questions. Great questions, everybody.
How
Thank
great
you
are
so
all of you for those great questions.
Mhm.
Karin, it was super fun getting to hear from you. This was a great deep dive into the greatest of subjects.
Yeah. Great to brainstorm with you all. It's very fun. And yeah, thanks for the questions. Excellent questions.
And anybody who's watching live, or if you're a community member, you can go watch a recording of what we're about to do next, which is the after chat. So I'll see y'all in there.
Bye-bye.